Welcome back to Pittsburgh Sports Now. We're joined by the coach, Doug Biega, for another edition of Hoop Scoop, sponsored by Beaver County Auto and PJ Latsko. Two things we're going to touch upon today, Doug. We have two big games this afternoon. Pitt taking on Louisville. Alan Saunders will be at is it the Duncan Center? What's the
Yum Center?
The Yum Center. There you go. The Yum Center for Pitt Louisville. And then we'll also have the big game between Duquesne and VCU. We're going to touch upon Duke real quick and then jump over to Duquesne. But the other night, before the game, you and Alan touched upon Zion Williamson and what a factor he was going to be. Proved out to be right, but in reality, Pitt shouldn't feel bad because nobody has stopped this guy this season. How good of a player is he? And he's probably one of the best players you've seen in years.
By years ever. He's legit. There is no stopping him. I remember looking at Allen at some point during the first half, and I said he can score 40 or 50 points whenever he wants to. And, everybody likes to look for flaws. And during halftime, a couple of reporters around me were saying doesn't really look to shoot. He's not a great ball handler. I said, and he still has 9 for 9 from the floor and scores whenever he wants to. He is not the prototypical basketball player. He looks like an offensive tackle, not a tight end or a wide receiver. He looks like he could be the number one pick in the NFL draft as a right tackle, left tackle. That's how imposing he looks. So it's easy to find the flaws, like just the way he looks. Not a traditional jump shot. Obviously, he's going to be a little bit loose with the ball. He's 6'8", 300 pounds. But until you find a way to stop what he does, or do all those other things really matter? And there is no stopping that man physically. He's a grown man among boys, and I believe he's going to be a grown man on the next level too. He scores layups like they're nothing. Bodies bounce off of him, and he does it with such smoothness inside that he scores so easy. You can point to flaws in his game, perimeter speaking, but until you could stop what he does inside, he doesn't even need a perimeter game. I've never seen someone who truly does not need an outside game.
Everyone knows Pitt is still, despite what they've done this year, they've created a little bit of expectation. They've created a buzz. Everyone knows that they're a player or two away, and that bared out the other night. Was the biggest thing you took from that game was the excitement level at the peak? That probably hasn't been like that in years.
It's been years, literally years. And I communicated with you throughout the day of how excited I was to just be covering that game. And a lot of it had to do with the Beatles coming into town. This Duke team has a lot of buzz. But the other part was the Florida State win and the Louisville win. And you thought there's a chance Pitt can win this game. At least compete in the game, which they inevitably did. But I got there early. And I went up and I got to the VIP section where I know the manager there very well from my high school coaching days. And he showed me around and he showed me the zoo where they had been since 8 o'clock in the morning and how Coach Capel had been giving them pizzas throughout the day. I mean, that is a true college atmosphere, and that was something that was missing the past couple of years.
Now we're going to move over to Duquesne. They take on VCU this afternoon, 2 o'clock. They're getting attention. There was a little bit of a buzz, not on the level of Pitt yet. However, I believe they received more media attention. Keith Dambrot was on the Paul Zeiss radio show. He was on the Mark Madden radio show. Twitter all day talking about Duquesne. Keith Dambrot was trending. They were probably on TV. They received more positive publicity in the last 48 hours than they have on probably in 5 years combined. There's no question that Dambrot has this thing rolling.
I mean, undoubtedly. You could almost kind of feel it at PPG, at the Penn State game. You could feel that there was some momentum building for the program. Their true quote-unquote big crowd, as Coach alluded to, relatively speaking, big crowd was the St. Joe crowd, and they won a great game there. And, and then they play so well on the road. When you and I did this segment last, we said those next 2 road games are so big because if you lose one or both of those, then these home games against these heavyweights won't have the same feel as they would if Duquesne was rolling, and they are rolling. And then to have St. Louis, and that's why they're getting the buzz, because you beat St. Joe's, you beat St. Louis. Those are name brands in the Atlantic 10. You play, especially the way they beat them, you play St. Louis the way they played them, and you beat them with the crowd that they had, which was the biggest in years I've read. You know, and I was there, and you could feel it. It felt good, and I think there's going to be a big crowd tomorrow. 2:00 game. It's kind of like a perfect time. There's no football for the first time since August. Why wouldn't you go see this game? And I can't say enough for the way Coach Dambrot has done this from the ground up. There are freshmen and sophomores competing against grown men out there, and he has put together such an identity of their defense is fantastic, and their offense, at least on display against St. Louis, was ridiculously unselfish. They took some crazy shots, but I think it was more out of fearlessness than it was out of selfishness, and it was just a fun game to be.
Winning is good, and he touched upon a little bit of this today when he met with the media. However, they're going to start venturing into territory now, uncharted territory as far as winning then becomes expectation. People are gonna want more, so they're not going to be going into games now as saddled Duquesne. People are going to be ready for them, and it's going to be a new thing that these young players are going to have to learn.
Yeah, that's absolutely dead on. I mean, they're not new anymore. You know, it's real now. They are expected to win or compete for this Atlantic 10 championship, but that's not crazy talk to talk about them winning this regular season. So the expectations are going to be there, and how these guys handle it is going to be very interesting to see. But the beauty of playing with house money, that they're ahead of schedule right now with freshmen and sophomores, is even if they don't handle it exceptionally well this year, they will be better served for it in the future, and they have all 4-year guys. None of these guys are leaving early for the NBA. They're going to have guys that are going to be there for the entirety of their careers, and this year they're so far ahead of schedule, but this year the learning experience these young men are getting is fantastic. You couldn't have asked for anything better as a Duquesne fan.
Name me one thing the other night that maybe stood out to you or impressed you most about either individually or team-wise, or something that you saw with Duquesne against a team like St. Louis that was the preseason favorite.
I can't name one thing. The first thing that jumped out at me was we all freshmen and sophomores at Duquesne. St. Louis has at least 3 fifth-year guys. Okay, that's a big difference, and it showed in their bodies. Okay, Mike Hughes showed out to me. He didn't have a monster night statistically, but in a 30-second span, he blocked a dunk and drew a charge and was chirping at them a little bit, like letting them know we're not just here to play tight, we're here to beat you. And that's the kind of mindset that I told you last time that I really think he brings to this team. They missed him when he was out for those couple games. Having Mike Hughes out there, I love everything about the way he plays. We got mauled a little bit on the glass. St. Louis had 54 rebounds to Duquesne's 31, but where Duquesne made their hay was 6 out of 29 from the three-point line, and they defended St. Louis to only shooting 2 of 20, made 25 of 38 foul shots. They handled St. Louis's physicality very well. They fouled out their center, who was a bigger guy. I just thought that Duquesne's defense, their team defense, was so good. I looked at Zach during the game. I said, nothing is easy for St. Louis. Like, they were 0 for 10 or 0 for 11, I believe, from the three-point line in the first half. I said, well, none of them were open. They're challenging everything, and there's no room inside. Like, you know, Mike Hughes was a presence in there, and, you know, you got those guys that are ball hawks with Sincere out there. And it's just, they're a good defensive team. It's not an accident. That's who he wants. That's who he recruits, and that's the way his teams are going to play.
All right. We appreciate it, Doug. Another good addition, and we'll have both games today covered all day on Pittsburgh Sports Now, and we'll catch up with you
next week.
Next week, or from the nearest arena near you.
Sounds good.